What's up, everybody? Welcome back. We are here with some MMA DFS picks and lineup advice. FanDuel, DraftKings, picks, best bets, everything you need for UFC 305 in Perth, Australia. Dricus du Plessis, Israel Adesanya, 12 fights on the card, pay-per-view, big contest on DraftKings, slightly bigger contest on FanDuel. What's up? I'm Brian Jester, co-founder here at Occupy Fantasy, joined by Jake the Snake, owner of MMADFS.com. Jake, what's happening, man? How you doing?
Pretty good, man. Not the worst 12 fight card as 12 fight cards go. So I think we got a decent one.
I think so too. And what we're going to do in this video, if you're new here, welcome. If you're not new, you know exactly how this goes. We're going to break down the main event between DDP and Izzy. We will talk about the one newcomer on the card. There is one. We'll play good fighter, good matchup, bad matchup. And I always say this is everyone's favorite game, but anytime I say that about anything, there's always someone in the comments saying, that's not my favorite game. So we'll see. Majority of everyone's favorite game, good fighter, bad fighter. For those fighters that have less than 4 fights in the UFC, give some context to their stats. And then we'll close the show out with a fight you have to target in DFS, as well as our stream parlay of the week. You don't want to miss that. We were off last week with that 10-fight card. Just really quickly, Jake, did that card play out to your expectations in terms of DFS and betting and what we expected from such a small card?
It was a little bit. It was a little bit weird. We had some opportunities that were created as it went on. It was capped off by the super weird heavyweight armbar that I don't think anyone saw coming. I thought Tybor was looking good until he got armbarred. So it had potential until that armbar. I thought it had potential, but yeah, I don't know, man. It was a weird slate for sure.
And that is the beauty of UFC, DFS, and betting sometimes, that it looks great until it doesn't. So let's start with this main event, 5-rounder. Just one 5-rounder on this card. Izzy du Plessis. Izzy back off after an extended layoff, especially in terms of Izzy's historical time in between fights against DDP. Close matchup here, $8,300 for Izzy on DraftKings. Du Plessis, $7,900. Jake, how do you see this fight playing out? More importantly, how do we play it in DFS?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's an interesting fight. Adesanya now 35 years old, 11 months removed from losing the belt to Strickland, 13-3 in the UFC at this point. Obviously, a super talented kickboxer, really good defensive wrestling. Doesn't really offer anything in terms of offensive grappling. He's going to be looking to recapture the belt to be like the first 3-time champion, whatever. I mean, I don't really care that much about that, but I feel like people get caught up on details like that. Obviously, he's trying to get the belt back. He lost it and got it back to Pereira. So he's shown he can do that. I mean, oftentimes when these champions lose the belt, they never get back on top. Most people only get one opportunity at it. He's looking for his third shot here. He just looked off in Strickland. Like, I feel like everyone's sort of in agreement. Like, that wasn't the normal Adesanya. He just had a bad day. I mean, whether or not that's a sign of decline, something Strickland was doing, I mean, who knows? Like, it's hard to say from one fight that, a guy's done. Maybe he was just, that wasn't his night, but he's in mid-30s now. He's been at the top for a long time. Hard to stay at the top. I feel like it always seems abrupt when these champions finally lose and suddenly they're not the best in the world. So maybe that's the case. Maybe he gets it back. Maybe it was a bad night. But in terms of, looking at like DFS potential, he typically doesn't put up huge striking totals, only averages 3.93 significant strikes landed per minute. It also doesn't absorb a ton of damage, only 3.11 significant strikes absorbed per minute. And like we said, doesn't really offer much in terms of wrestling at all. So historically, he's been reliant on getting well-timed knockouts and a bunch of knockdowns to really score well in DFS. Not really putting up big scores in decisions, but at his mid-range price tag, you never know on a smaller slate. Maybe if he scored 98 points, something like that, he could still be in play. So going to be on the line, if he wins a decision or if he doesn't get a bunch of knockdowns and a finish. I think he is going to be right on that line of whether or not it's enough to be in optimal lineup if he wins. Even at the mid-range price tag, just really depends on how the rest of the slate goes. Other side of things, we have Du Plessis, 30 years old, 7-0 in the UFC, making his first title defense after winning a split decision over Strickland in Sean Strickland's first title defense. So the belt's been getting passed around lately. Pereira had it, Izzy had it, Strickland had it, Du Plessis has it, and now we're back around to Adesanya. Du Plessis, I mean, he's good. Like, I mean, people have been trying to find holes in his game for a while. He gets hit a lot. His cardio, he looks tired, blah, blah, blah. pushes a crazy pace, averages 6.49 significant strikes landed per minute and 4.77 absorbed per minute. Adds on 3 takedowns landed per 15 minutes. So well-rounded, can land takedowns. I mean, not like an insane grappler where he's like this huge submission threat. He has like some guillotines, but he can mix in the wrestling to, change it up in addition to his high volume striking. 19 of his 21 pro wins ended early. Obviously a huge finishing threat. Did go the distance in his one title fight. So, I mean, maybe that shows that, he was finishing some of these guys on the lower level. Maybe he's not going to finish guys all the way at the top. We'll see. He averaged 115 DraftKings points in his 5 UFC finishes, and he scored 119 points in his recent decision win. So he's shown massive scoring potential. Now he's 7,900 on DraftKings. The line has been moving in his favor. This is a straight up pick him now at -110 for either side after Du Plessis opened the week at +110. I mean, depending on where you look. So obviously that's going to drive his ownership up a little bit, and Adesanya is down a little bit. The mispricing and the scoring potential is kind of clear here. I think you are still going to have the Du Plessis detractors that are going to want to fade him. They've been fading him since his first fight. Hasn't been going well for him. I mean, I'm not saying I've always been on him. I mean, it's definitely not the case. And I'm not on him here. I mean, I think I'm leaning towards Adesanya, but it's not a comfortable pick. I think it's going to be a striking battle. I think it's going to be hard for Du Plessis to take Adesanya down. And then it's really just which version of Adesanya shows up. If we get the version that showed up against Strickland, then Du Plessis can totally win this fight. If we get vintage Adesanya that can stand outside, land from distance, then I think 100% Adesanya can win a striking battle here. I think he's the more technical striker. It's just whether or not, he's on the decline or not, and how hungry Du Plessis is and what improvements Du Plessis has made. I mean, you always hear people talking about like the percentage better you get after becoming champion, just from confidence, training, money, whatever it is. So we'll see. I mean, one guy's on the upswing and one guy's on the downswing. We'll see. We'll see how those intersect. In terms of DFS for Du Plessis, I mean, I think he clearly has more upside, but this is the worst matchup he's ever had. So we should temper expectations. We shouldn't expect him to just like automatically put up a huge score if he wins. I think there's definitely a real chance where he could score 90 to 95 points in a decision win. And just like Adesanya, I mean, they're priced similarly enough. They're kind of in the same boat where they're probably going to be on the line. I mean, you never know. I think Du Plessis has a little more scoring potential, but there's a decent chance whoever wins, it's going to depend on how the rest of the slate goes as to whether or not they are in the winning lineup. And there's always going to be a lot of leverage to be gained by fading the main event. So that's definitely an angle to take on a smaller slate where we only have 12 fights. But, it's tricky. It's one of those spots where you almost just want to be hedged between Adesanya, Du Plessis, and fading the fight. It's hard to really take a stand. Obviously, if you're only doing single entry or a couple lineups, you probably have to. But if you're doing a bunch of lineups, I think you probably want to spread it out a little bit more. I'm curious on your take, what you're doing here, but that's kind of my initial thoughts on it.
Yeah, just really quickly, I have a bunch of questions and some takes about this fight because it's extremely important for this card. In low risk contests, we're stacking this fight, right?
Yeah, because I think it's
you don't sound convinced
most of the time. Well, it's one of those things like, are we ever excited about stacking lower volume fights or heavyweight fights? Not that this is heavyweight, but I kind of lump those together. The times we're not excited about stacking is when either the winner isn't going to put up a huge score or the loser is going to score almost nothing. And in this case, I do think the loser is a high floor, but I don't see a huge ceiling necessarily for the winner. So yes, I'm stacking it, but it's not like I'm not running to the computer to hammer low risk entries this week just because it's not my favorite type of low risk week with a lower ceiling for the winner.
Totally fair, and I get that for sure. Let's talk about high risk contests because obviously that's the more exciting and more strategic angle when it comes to DFS. My first thought was, typically we are looking not to play Adesanya in DFS because of the lower striking, all the reasons you mentioned, right? Typically he's 8,500 to 9,300 on DraftKings, right? Which makes it a much easier decision. Here it's not as simple, right? At $8,300, auto fade Izzy at this price tag, because like you said, there are some ways, even if he scores 80, right, in a lower volume, he can get there based on his price tag, depending on how many dogs win. So I think that was the first thing I noticed, and it seemed like you agree with that, right?
Yeah, I mean, definitely. I was just looking at his last 5 fights. The winner in Adesanya's last 5 fights scored in DraftKings points 95, 96, 92, 86, 75. So I mean, at this price tag, totally they're going to be straddling that line of whether or not it's enough.
And with the line move with DDP's scoring history, obviously I think his ownership is justified to be higher than Izzy's. Do you think, and I was going back and forth in this just looking at it, do you think that DDP is justifiably the considered the better finisher in this matchup? He has a higher inside the distance than Izzy. Obviously, DDP hasn't been finished, and the UFC got finished once outside the UFC. Do you think that's fair? Do you think it should be closer to 50-50 on who finishes who or who's likely to finish who in this matchup, or do you think that is appropriately lined?
Yeah, I mean, I think they should be closer. I'll correct you on one thing. Du Plessis has been finished in both of his for
Oh,
losses,
okay. Sorry.
I believe. But yeah, I mean, I think that Du Plessis in general is more of a finisher, but Adesanya is harder to finish. So that is the equalizer, the fact that like he's fighting Adesanya. So you got to
Right.
finish Adesanya, and that's going to be super hard. Whereas Adesanya is more of a decision guy, but I do think that like he is capable of knocking out Du Plessis, and you've got like the whole bad blood thing going on, which I don't know if that actually increases the chances of a finish. I feel like half the time we have bad blood, it turns out to be a worse fight, like with
Yeah.
less action.
Yeah. The only time it happened with Izzy was the revenge against Poetan, right? And he
Right.
got the KO
Yeah.
there. So
Yeah.
again, that is a one size sample. The last thing I'll say about this fight, I think single entry, small field, micro field, whatever you want to call it, however big the contest size is, the obvious leverage is Izzy, right? He's going to be half the ownership in those contests of DDP at basically a coin flip. And if you're just playing pure math, that's the play, I think. And again, we're not typically pure math guys when it comes to MMA DFS, but to me, that seems like an easy answer. And then you could just be devastated at 2 a.m. when obviously it fails.
Yeah. Nah, I like that angle too.
All right, cool. All right, we've talked enough about this. If you guys have further questions about this main event or anything else about the card, go ahead and drop a comment on the video or join our Discord server, acrobatfantasy.com/Discord. We'll be in there for the next 48 hours and beyond for this fight. All right, Jake, let's move on. Let's not play good fighter, bad fighter just yet. Let's talk about the one newcomer, Stuart Nickel. He is undefeated. Not the best competition, I would say. You and I both agreed. Looks interesting for DFS, but difficult to decipher if he's actually good or bad. Maybe we should put him in good fighter, bad fighter. But talk to me about his resume, his fighting style, how you see this matchup playing out in his first trip to the octagon.
Yeah, so coming in 29 years old, 8-0 with 7 finishes, Australian grappler, BJJ black belt. Like you said, has fought a really low level of competition. So he's unproven, and it's just hard to know if like the tape is kind of lying to your eyes when people are fighting like opponents that bad. How are they going to look against good opponents? It's really hard to know, especially if he's fighting guys that aren't very good grapplers and he's just dominating them. Like I don't think he is the best striking. So if someone can force him to stand and trade, he's probably going to struggle. And then just evaluating, okay, well, how is he going to do against UFC level grapplers? I think that's the $50 million question. Whether or not Jesus Aguilar is actually a UFC level grappler is up for debate.
Yeah.
But he's in the UFC and he's somehow 2-1 in the UFC. Should be 1-2, but kind of that last robbery of a decision. So, anyways, I think it's a decent test. Where you're getting a low level grappler for his first test. Where obviously there are much tougher options they could have given him, but we'll find out a little bit here. I do think Nickel will probably, well, I won't say probably, he will definitely go to his grappling. He's made, no secret about that. Like, yeah, I'm going to be looking to grapple. I'm going to be trying to take him down. I'm be a dog on a bone. Aguilar is, like a kind of a one-dimensional guillotine specialist, but I would say he's improving a little bit in terms of wrestling and striking since he's been in the UFC. But in general, Aguilar is just a guy that wants to jump guillotine. Nickel is a guy that just wants to grapple the whole time. So you might look at that and say there should be plenty of opportunities for Aguilar to get a guillotine. I don't know. It's hard to get a guillotine on a black belt. Super interested in Nickel, though. We'll see in terms of how he looks, I should say. Super interested in terms of how he's going to look in this matchup. I do think he has DFS upside from his grappling, especially on DraftKings, where he could get a bunch of control time. He's really been more focused on ground and pound lately. Like his first, I think, 3 career finishes were all by submission. His last 4 were all by ground and pound. So he's still looking for submissions, but he's getting a lot more ground and pound, which is great for DFS. We love that for DraftKings specifically. He has the potential to put up a big score, takedowns, control time, ground and pound, and finishes, which is what you want to see basically for, I would say, a more volatile, high variance fight where we do have a lot of questions about this guy, but his upside is undeniable. And Aguilar has really struggled with being taken down. He's struggled with being controlled. He's got a 40% takedown defense. So it's a tournament play where you're going to pull the trigger and see what happens. And you're playing him for his upside, but you just have to know there's a chance that he is a fraud and he looks bad, and Aguilar either gets a guillotine, outstrikes him, out wrestles him. I mean, there's multiple ways this guy fails, but you have to like his upside for DFS.
Yeah, I'm glad you pointed that out. When I first started charting him for our model, the first couple of fights I looked at was just pure submissions, not a ton of ground and pound. I was like, maybe this guy doesn't have as much upside as his grappling would indicate. But then as his fights went on, it was more and more ground and pound, and his upside became apparent. So I'm glad you see that too. Where do you have his ownership checking in, FanDuel and DraftKings?
He's at that he's going to go overlooked because he's in that price range just below Nolan, Jenkins, Gamera, all these other guys. So he's 9K, and someone has to get left out in that range. I think it's going to be him. So we have him owned at 24%. So a great leverage play off some of these much higher owned expensive options.
Yeah, we love to take chances on guys when there's a lot of uncertainty, when their ownership is low or low-ish. Don't like take chances on uncertainty when their ownership is high. So Nickel certainly falls in the former category, which makes him a great tournament play. This week, Jake, I'm glad you and I are on the same page. So now let's play good fighter, good matchup, bad matchup. Less than 4 fights in the UFC. It's a simple game. I asked Jake, is this fighter good or bad? Is this a good or bad matchup for DFS for this specific slate? We keep it simple. A sentence or two per fighter. Speaking of Nickel, we mentioned he's fighting Jesus Aguilar. 3 fights in the UFC. Is he good or bad? And is this a good or bad matchup for him in DFS?
Yeah, Aguilar is bad, but the variance that makes us like Nickel in tournaments also leaves Aguilar in play, because if Nickel goes on the other side and it's terrible, then that's a bonus for Aguilar. So I would say it's a volatile, high upside, low floor matchup for Aguilar here.
Fair enough. All right, next we have one of the most insulting lines I've ever seen. Tom Nolan is, the last time I checked was like minus 1,400. I'm sure it's changed by now. He's been dropped in both of his fights. He is like minus 700 inside the distance here against Alex Reyes, who probably shouldn't be in the UFC. Has been knocked out in the first round. Has scored a combined 9 DraftKings points in his 2 UFC fights. Jake, this is just a complete meme fight by every possible angle. All right. I assume both these guys are bad. I assume it's a good matchup for both. Just talk to me just briefly about this fight. And do you think the line is justified? Is Reyes a complete waste of money, lighting our bankroll on fire if we play him at all? What do you think?
I mean, me and you were talking about this earlier in the week a little bit. Like, it's insane when you have 2 guys with terrible defense that one of them would be negative 1,200. And these guys have absolutely terrible defense. So, like, I get that Tom Nolan should win this fight. He should finish Reyes. Reyes was unable to walk like 6 years ago after a spinal infection. He was literally unable to walk. So how this guy's like even back in the octagon is insane. That happened after his UFC debut. I'm sure he's still under contract. He's like, look, guys, I'm going to work my way back. The UFC felt bad for him, but not that bad because they've been giving him hard matchups. So they're using him to build up guys. You feel bad. He's like Dominic's brother. He's getting up there in age. He lost his whole career. He's 37 now. He turns 38 in October. I mean, they're both bad because they have terrible defense, but Tom Nolan at least has good offense.
True.
Whereas Alex Reyes had good offense before he had that spinal infection, but we've seen like 3 minutes of him since 2017, and we don't know where he's at right now. Like, he was 31 or whatever when he left, and he got knocked out in the first round of his UFC debut, albeit up a weight class against Mike Perry, but we don't even know if he was actually good then or if he was just beating up bums on like the California regional scene. Right. But he had a crazy finishing streak coming into the UFC. Then he gets immediately knocked out. Then he's out for 6 years. Then he comes back, immediately knocked out again. So, I mean, he has the potential to be the worst fighter on the UFC roster and just like a complete charity case as to why he's even here. But if he can look better in his second fight back, we've seen Tom Nolan dropped in both of his fights by very low-level opponents. So if Alex Reyes can just like get some glimmer of decency back, then he's definitely got a shot at finishing Nolan. We just saw his brother Dominic, come in and pull up the big upset against Dustin Jacoby. So can't say it's impossible. I think you have to bet Reyes if you're looking at the money line. If you think Tom Nolan's money line is insane, which I do, and his inside the distance line is absolutely insane, then I think you have to bet Reyes here, and you probably are lighting money on fire. But it's just one of those crazy fights where it should be volatile. Maybe Reyes is just so done right now that he has no chance, but you got to bet against a bad chin, and both guys have bad chins, so it's a bad fighter, good matchup, I would say, for both guys.
What a shit show. All right, let me ask you this. Reyes, $6,400, one of the cheapest fighters you'll see in DFS on DraftKings. If he survives the first round, still loses, is there a way he can end up in the optimal lineup? We saw it, obviously, with Mark McMahon with a 10-point optimal DraftKings performance. $6,400. It makes it a little bit more likely. Does that make it you a little more likely to play Reyes in DFS in your tournament lineups, or he's more than likely going to get freight trained here and not be worth playing in your lineups?
Yeah, I mean, you never know. Like, there's a few other really cheap guys. So, like, if you play Reyes and you're playing him for that angle, I mean, maybe. I mean, you can't really. If Marnik Man can be in the winner, you can't eliminate anyone. So, if you're just playing from the idea that all the underdogs are going to lose, so then we just need the cheapest underdog to make the best favorites work. I mean, you have to build a certain way. Obviously, you're not playing many underdogs in that scenario. You play like one or two underdogs,
Right.
and then you would try to figure out the way that lineup works. So it takes more thinking, I think, if you're going to play that angle. I don't know, man. There's some cheap options here. I think Dan Hooker being 6,900, 500 more, like that makes it a little bit tougher when you have some actual fighters that are not that much more expensive.
That's fair.
But I think Reyes needs the finish here. I would be surprised if he got in the winning lineup as a loser, but I won't say it's completely impossible.
Okay, we spent far into too much time on this fight. Let's move on. Jack Jenkins, actual good fighter, by my estimation, lost his last fight in the UFC with that arm injury. He's 2-1 in the UFC. Is he good or bad? I assume this is a good matchup against Herbert Burns, who is finished by everyone.
Yeah, that's definitely a good fight or good matchup. Herbert Burns, quits in the second round, fight after fight after fight. I mean, that can always change, but that has been the pattern in recent years.
Really quickly, the ownership difference that you have right now projected between Jenkins and Nolan, is it justified in your opinion?
No, I don't think it's justified, but I do think that if you just look at how you think the fights are going to play out, like Jenkins is probably going to be a little more tentative early on, making sure not to get submitted. That makes it a little bit harder to put up an insane score, whereas Nolan's going to come out just guns blazing. So like Nolan, I think, has the more nuclear ceiling, whereas Jenkins has the safer ceiling.
Fair enough. All right, that's a good way to look at it. All right, moving on. Continuing this good fighter, bad fighter game, we have Luana Santos, who is 8-1, 3-0 in the UFC against our girl, King Casey O'Neill. Santos, is she as good, or is she as good as her record indicates? Is she worse? And how do we value this matchup against Casey O'Neill?
I think Santos is very overrated. I think she's been the beneficiary of some very favorable matchmaking. She beat Egger. That's the part where it's hard to say she's like a complete fraud, because she moved up a weight class. She fought Egger. She won a lower scoring decision. But like beating Agapova did nothing for me. I mean, like, I think people are taking that and be like, oh man, she's a crazy submission threat. Like, no, everyone submits Agapova. Like that didn't change my opinion on Santos at all. Like going into that fight, I was like, Santos is a great play here. She's gonna submit Agapova. She did it. Didn't change my opinion at all. I still think Santos is super green, not a very good striker, wild on the feet. She had the knockout over Juliana Miller, who like just turned it into like a Wendy's brawl, and that was idiotic. But yeah, so we don't know, man. We know that, Santos has decent judo. She's a judo black belt, and she like held her own against Egger, but we haven't seen her in a prolonged striking battle. And I think that's what Casey O'Neill is going to do. And I think she's going to expose her on the feet here, but we'll see, man. I'm going to call Santos a bad fighter, but it's a high upside matchup. O'Neill is just crazy brawler, super hittable. I think they're both going to be really hittable, and we're going to see a high volume fight, but Santos could just hold O'Neill against the fence and ruin it. That's definitely a possible outcome as well.
Yeah, fair enough. All right, next we have, speaking of laughable matchups, we have Walter Walker against Junior Tafa, who in our database, I have to triple check every single time he or his brother are on the card. Both these guys have less than 3 fights in the UFC. Walker has just one. Is either good or bad? Is this a good or bad matchup for either?
Dude, this is like the king of the shitty sibling cards. We have
Yes.
Alex Reyes, Herbert Burns, Junior Tapa, Walter Walker. It's amazing they put all these guys on one card. Maybe they're gonna cut them all afterwards. But both these guys are terrible, man. Both these guys are awful. But that makes it a good matchup for both of them, because Junior Tapa is the worst wrestler in the UFC. All Walker wants to do is wrestle. Walker is a complete gas bag who isn't a very good striker. So if he gasses out or gets caught on the feet, then Junior Tafa could land a highlight reel knockout. But man, these guys are one-dimensional and terrible.
Cool. That's what you're tuning in to UFC 305 for. Excellent, excellent fights like that one. Finally, we have Carlos Prates, who is actually an exciting fighter. And by my estimation, actually a talented fighter. Jake, do you agree? Is he good or bad? And how do you think this matchup looks for Li Jingliang?
Man, I think Prades is really good, man. I think he's a really good striker. This guy was just built to strike. He's got baseball bats for legs. He's so long. I mean, the guy's like a predator. It's an interesting matchup because Jing Liang's coming off a neck injury, like a 2-year layoff, and like I'm generally looking to fade guys off neck injuries, especially if they had spine surgery. I don't think Lee actually had spine surgery. He just had like a nerve issue in his neck when he was preparing for a fight. That still neck injury, 36 years old, both big red flags, long layoff, going against a really talented striker. I think Prades is a good fighter. I would call it a bad matchup if Lee can look like his old self because he's never been knocked out. Um, Super durable, good striker himself. So I think it's a bad matchup, man. But Prades is really good. I'm not really looking to play Prades in this spot though, but it definitely makes me nervous about the neck injury.
That's fair. And it's just so funny because you mentioned Lee being 36 with an injury. You mentioned Reyes being 37 now, coming off an injury, and that maybe not being the same. You and I, right before we started recording, we're talking about in your late 30s injuries. They're not fun. We sympathize with these guys, so we certainly understand the situations that they are in. All right, that'll do it for good fighter, bad fighter, good matchup, bad matchup. As we move on, we close out the show here. Reminder that this show is sponsored by Underdog Fantasy. If you haven't already, make sure you sign up using promo code OCCUPY. Get a deposit match bonus up to $250. You can play all sorts of pick'em contests. You can play best ball. Check out our Occupy Best Ball channel here on YouTube for NFL drafts. So that is currently in full swing as the season's here in a couple of weeks. Jake, do you have any underdog plays for me this week? If not, we can move on to the next segment.
I think Adesanya over 21 and a half minutes is decent, man. I mean, it's not like a great numbers play. The fight's plus money slightly to go the distance. It's open the week at plus 130. It's down to plus 108, plus 100 different places. But, you're going over 21 and a half. So obviously a late fifth round finish, you're still okay. I don't really see a finish here, but as soon as I say that, obviously, something's going to get knocked out immediately.
All right, so there you go. If you want to play it and you haven't signed up yet, Underdog Fantasy is the best way to play Pick'em for MMA and UFC. All right, fight you have to target in DFS. We've talked about quite a few fights here, Jake. And before we get into that, just want to make sure everyone, if you're not already, make sure you're subscribed to the channel here on YouTube. It is free to do so. It supports the channel, allows us to do this video every week. There are 12 or more fights on the card. We're trying to get to 10,000 subscribers before the end or before the beginning of NFL regular season. We're almost there. So do your part. Do us a favor. Go ahead and click subscribe. You'll get notified when these videos go live every Friday or Saturday. And give us a thumbs up if you like the video. So Jake, we talked about a lot, but if you had to pick a fight that whoever wins is likely to score extremely well and be in the optimal lineup, which one are you choosing?
Yeah, I think it's gonna be the Nolan Reyes fight, man. Someone's getting finished here early. I would be shocked if this fight even saw the second round. So I get that like everyone's gonna be on Nolan, but you definitely want to hedge with some Reyes just in case he's not a complete corpse out there.
I'm not gonna put a lie detector on you, but true or false, you have bet Reyes round one sub plus 6,000 this week.
I mean, yeah, like I said, you got to bet Reyes if you think the Nolan number's bad. And I mean, 60-1 at a round one sub, and most of his recent finishes have been first round submissions. Like, you got to take that shot. Like, come on.
Nah, I'm with you. I mean, you're not going to get an argument from me now. Come on. So, all right, finally, speaking of betting, we'll close out with our stream parlay. I pick a side total or prop. Jake does the same. We parlay it together. And we mentioned Prates. We mentioned a particularly tough matchup, assuming Li Jingliang is healthy enough. And despite Prates finishing his first two fights in the UFC, not much grappling upside, really, at least not on top, Prates. I have this fight going the distance more often than the lines indicate, Jake, so I'll say Prates, Li Jingliang fight goes the distance. I think plus 160, plus 155 was the number we got for the stream parlay, so that'll be my leg.
Yeah, plus 165 now, I believe.
Nice, okay.
And I'm gonna pair it with another fight goes the distance. We get the bigger octagon. I'm gonna go Tafa Walker fight goes the distance at plus 155 and just pray that Walker is able to grab Tafa and lay on him for 15 minutes, which I think there's a really good chance that's how the fight plays out. So we pair those together. Give me plus 575 on the parlay.
All right, plus 575 if you want to tail. There will likely be a bigger parlay in our daily plug at occupyfantasy.com where Jake comes in Friday evenings and posts his top DFS plays, best remaining bets where the lines are still available. And then I always think the most important part, the lineup strategy section, tells you how to build high risk and low risk lineups for both DraftKings and FanDuel, depending on the contest that you're in. That'll be live tonight. Our Occupy model, which I alluded to earlier, is up and running, ranks every fighter, FanDuel and DraftKings using our proprietary data, our charted data, and our OF index algorithms. And Jake's been working all week. His content is up on his site MMADFS.com has premium content. We talked about the bets and the odds moving. You want to get his bets earlier in the week, go ahead and subscribe to his site. And he also has the sheet, which writes up every single fight on the card for free, betting and DFS implications. Jake, long week, but we got a good one on store here for Saturday. Any final thoughts about this card?
Let's hope that not all the track goes off. I think we got lots of high-owned plays that are very volatile. So, hopefully that plays into our favor.
Absolutely. So for Jake at DFS_MMA on Twitter, I'm at Brian Jester FF, as well as at Occupy Fantasy. Check out the sites MMADFS.com and OccupyFantasy.com for all your premium UFC and MMA DFS needs. And again, one final ask, subscribe to the channel if you're not already. Help get us to 10K. We're doing a giveaway at 10K, so you'll be included if you click subscribe. So for Jake, I'm Brian. Thanks for listening. Good luck and enjoy UFC 305.